The Liberals have rolled out 3 gun bans in 3 years, while gang-related homicide has shot up 92%, basically doubled, along with a 32% rise in violent crime, all since the Liberals took office. Those same gun-owning Canadians need to ask what in the world is going on. The Liberals spent the first 3 years of their majority government pontificating about how government has no business classifying firearms and that it should be left to the experts at the RCMP lab. Then they engaged in precisely that behavior at a level we've never seen before in the history of our country.
Justin Trudeau has repeatedly said that he is not banning hunting rifles. You're saying he's banning hunting rifles. I know he's banning my hunting rifles. So who's guilty of spreading misinformation here?
Well, the government is obviously guilty of doing that exact thing. In fact, if you go all the way back to the May 2020 gun ban, there was AR-15s included in that, but a whole suite of other guns as well. I know my husband, who's a veteran, the guns he hunted with were banned way back then. So to be perfectly honest, they've been banning hunting rifles all along. This latest gun ban that was, of course, introduced as an amendment in the 11th hour to a piece of legislation that was supposed to be targeting handguns, of course, bans hunting rifles, or you wouldn't have First Nations groups, the NDP, and everybody else opposing it, including law enforcement. So yeah, the misinformation and disinformation is coming from the government, and they can't even decide what they're doing, how they're going to do it, or who they're going to do it to.
You know, and let's talk about that, because there are so many guns that are moving from unregistered. So the government has no idea where they are or who has them.
Right.
And they're moving completely to prohib. The SKS is a great example of this. Low estimates have them pegged at 200,000 of them inside the country. I would suggest the number is probably at least double that.
Oh, yeah.
And so how do they even go about enforcing this? Do they take the list of PAL and RPAL holders, give it to the RCMP and say, okay, well, start knocking on doors? How do they think that they're going to go about enforcing any of this?
Well, it's impossible to enforce. The man hours it would take to go door to door is literally impossible. We have a deficit as far as law enforcement personnel goes in this country. The military has a deficit. Both law enforcement, military, Canada Post, everybody has told the government, including provinces and one territory, has told the government that they don't have the resources nor the interest in doing this. So you're right. It is completely impossible to enforce. The only thing they could do here, of course, is confiscate the approximately 90,000 AR-15s that were legally acquired here in Canada, because, of course, those are registered. And as we know, registration leads to confiscation 100% of the time. It's the only purpose it serves. As far as everything else goes, they have no idea who has what. And if you think about it, we're in a country of over 10 million square kilometers. When we went from a gun ban that maybe had about 250,000 rifles to a gun ban that's going to encompass well over 1 million guns from hundreds of thousands of Canadians over a country as vast as ours. If they were to decide to go to people's houses and do searches, this would literally take well over 100 years to do. So I've said it right from the beginning, this entire thing is impossible. They may have a few people participate in some sort of, they call it a buyback. I call it a compensated confiscation program. But even that doesn't even exist. We're going on 3 years of this gun ban. My AR-15s are still sitting here in the room next to me in my gun room, locked up, just like they have been for the last 20 years safely. And of course, blood isn't running in the streets. So they have no idea what they're doing, how they're going to do it. And I think at this point, they just throw a bone to the media every now and then to appease the anti-gun lobbies, to make it look like they're still focused on this, but they're not.
Now, we filed for access to information with the federal government. We wanted to know who in their right mind they were talking to before they brought in these amendments to Bill C-21. Now, we know, or I have a pretty good idea, and I think you do too, who exactly they were talking to.
Yes.
You know, before they decided to ban everything cool, cheap, and cheap to shoot in this country. I've got a pretty good idea. I wanted to see it in writing, and I wanted to see those communications. I know who they weren't talking to, and that was First Nations groups. I know they weren't talking to people like the Fur Institute of Canada, who have come out and said, you have considered us experts on other legislation surrounding what we do. Why didn't you talk to us about this? Your handgun ban puts us in danger. Now your hunting rifle ban outlaws the humane execution of our industry. Were you guys consulted on this at all? Or did you try to shoehorn yourself into consultations, which I think you might want to do sometimes?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is when C-21 was introduced, of course, it was a piece of legislation that focused primarily on banning handguns, or at least the sale of handguns, and of course, banned toy guns like airsoft. And there was a variety of other small measures within the bill that are not overly popular either. And then in the 11th hour, they introduced this amendment. And I got to tell you, even members of the Liberal caucus had no idea this was coming. They were not briefed on it. They don't know about it. They've even started speaking out about it. So, I do believe the only people they've consulted were probably anti-gun lobby groups and maybe pollsters. And even then, they've shot themselves in the foot, so to speak, with this piece, because they've gone a step too far and they've proven themselves to be incapable of being trusted to properly classify what's legitimate and adequate for civilian use in Canada.
That's an excerpt from my show every night. It's called the Ezra Levant Show. That's me, Ezra Levant. You can see the whole thing behind our paywall. Well, there's a lot of goodies behind there. I do a show every weeknight. My friends Sheila Gunn Reid and David Menzies and Nat and Kat have their shows too. You get a ton of content for just $8 a month. There's so much in there you won't find anywhere else. Go to rebelnewsplus.com.